One of the fascinating topics in biology is, where do animals go in the winter? Where do insects go to avoid freezing? How do they survive the winter? Where do different kinds of amphibians and reptiles survive the winter? And in some of my videos, I've addressed those questions. Today, I want to address the way duckweed survives the winter. Duckweed is a common plant that's seen on the surfaces of ponds and lakes, and it has a really unique way of surviving the winter. And that's what I want to share today. How does duckweed survive the winter? And we're going to go to New York State to do this today. Right here in your backyard. You never know what you're going to find. And here's to make this invasive. It's exotic. It's the front yard. Dogwoods are flowering. And I just took a couple swipes. Terrestrial environment.
Produce seed pollen. And it's...
So as you can see by my dress, it's pretty cold here. I'm in New York State, north of New York City, on the Hudson River in USA. It was about 34 degrees this morning. So one of the questions is, what happens to this duckweed when the water freezes? You'll know that water always freezes at the surface first because ice is less dense than water. And think about what would happen to these plants if they freeze at the surface. What happens if you put a piece of lettuce in a freezer? It just gets crushed. It gets wilted when you thaw it out because the ice crystals break up the cells in the tissue. These plants will all die in this frozen temperature. I'm always fascinated by how organisms in temperate climates survive the winter. In several of my videos, we've talked about how frogs and turtles, different kinds of insects, survive the winter. How does duckweed survive the winter? Well, it's got a really unique way of doing it. Well, about this time of the year, duckweeds form a special bud off the edge of one of their leaves. That's called a turion. And the turion starts to do photosynthesis. And instead of just making sugars, it takes those sugars and assembles them into a starch molecule. And starch molecules are really big. And they're dense and they're heavy. And they weigh the turion down till it sinks to the bottom of the pond. Ponds don't freeze all the way to the bottom. Only the surface freezes. So that turion is safe from freezing by laying on the bottom of the pond. But what happens in the spring is the absolute reverse. So the turion, when the water at the surface has thawed out, the turion starts taking that dense starch molecule that's weighing it down and breaking it down into sugars, which are less dense. And the turion floats back to the surface and then grows into a duckweed plant. Fascinating way to survive the winter and avoid freezing to death. Strategies for survival. Whether it's desert heat extremes, depths of dark oceans, or surviving the winter, nature finds a way. It's so cool how organisms adapt and find different strategies to survive. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Nature in Your Backyard. If you like what I do, please subscribe and hit that like button. And it'll enable me to share this with more people. Thanks for watching Nature at Your Door.